Hello everybody and welcome back to the third and final part of our special on the presidency of Benjamin Harrison. I've been really enjoying this series and I hope to do another similar 3-part series like this, so please like and subscribe and enjoy the video. Now let's hop right into it. Now when we last left off, our dear friend Benjamin Harrison had become ever more prominent in politics and had managed to work his way to the United States Senate. Then, after a hard-fought campaign to keep his seat, Harrison would lose it and go back into the private sphere. Except that's not what happened because the election of 1888 was approaching and Harrison was vying for the nomination. In the aftermath of his defeat, Harrison was sent on a speaking tour of the nation. The Republicans at this point had no clear leader. James G. Blaine, the former Secretary of State, was in a self-imposed exile in Europe, and as such did not want to run for president again. He had already felt the sting of defeat and did not think that one who had lost the race for his party had any right for the nomination, at least in this election, that is. Even though Blaine had stated several times that he did not want the Republican nomination for president in 1888, that didn't stop people from trying to give him the nomination, and they had a strategy to get it to him. Essentially, the Blaine men would shift the ballots of certain states to other candidates to make it look like they were surging, but then have those delegates pull away from that candidate to make it look like they had stalled out and were now losing the momentum, hoping to do this with each candidate and create a contested convention that would lead to the delegates turning to Blaine to save the Republican Party. Now, when the 1888 convention first started, the first recipient of the delegates in this plan would end up being Benjamin Harrison, and the New York delegates would vote for him. Now for part 2 of the plan, right? But no, Harrison continued to surge after they gave him the delegates, and by the 8th ballot of the convention, he had the votes needed to become the Republican nominee, and his vice presidential nominee would be Levi P. Morton, who had been a member of the House of Representatives and the U.S. Minister to France under both Presidents Garfield and Arthur. Now, Harrison was actually a pretty attractive candidate for a couple of big reasons. One, he was from the state of Indiana, which was an important swing state in the elections of 1884 and 1888, one that Republicans would need to win if they wanted to win the presidency. Harrison had been a veteran of the Union Army and supported pensions for disabled veterans, something that made him look better than Cleveland, who had avoided service in the Civil War through substitution and had been consistently vetoing pension bills for Union soldiers. And Harrison supported silver in the economy and a rise in tariffs. This made him both solid with the manufacturers and the farmers. Now, on the Democratic side, President Cleveland would be easily renominated by the Democratic Party, and in fact, he became the first Democratic candidate to be renominated since 1840 when Martin Van Buren was renominated. And as we all know, Van Buren lost the 1840 election. The campaign for 1880 was comparatively much cleaner than the election had been in 1884. It focused on issues like the tariff instead of scandals. President Cleveland would not actively campaign in 1888, much like he had in the previous election, and Harrison would follow the lead of his friend and now deceased former president, James A. Garfield, in running a front porch campaign. Harrison would give a grand total of over 90 speeches on the campaign from either his front porch or at a slightly larger venue near his home. While the election was much less scandal-focused than the previous election, that did not prevent it from being completely free of scandal. The two that we will focus on was the revelation that the treasurer of the Republican Party was caught buying votes in the state of Indiana, an important swing state, and the Murchison letter, in which the British minister to the United States said in a leaked letter that President Cleveland was a better president from the perspective of the British, and this letter would cost President Cleveland important votes in the Irish bloc in New York. So on November 6, 1888, Benjamin Harrison was elected as the 23rd President of the United States. Harrison had won the two important swing states of Indiana and New York, taking both his home state and the home state of President Cleveland. Harrison would actually lose the popular vote while winning the Electoral College. However, it does need to be said that if African Americans in the South had been freely allowed to vote, Harrison likely would have won the popular vote. Harrison, for now, though, would start the long, lamed-up period of the 19th century and begin assembling his cabinet. So, as Harrison was assembling his cabinet, he made several people mad, mainly because he did not consult party leaders and put who they wanted in the cabinet. For the State Department, he chose the loser of the 1884 election and former Secretary of State James G. Blaine. At the Treasury Department, he picked William Windom, who had served with Blaine in the Garfield administration. At War, he chose Redfield Proctor, who had been the governor of Vermont. For the Attorney General, he decided on his old law partner of William Henry Harrison Miller. John Wanamaker was chosen for Postmaster General, Benjamin Tracy for the Navy, and John Noble at Interior. And for Agriculture, which had only been recently created during the final months of the Cleveland administration, Jeremiah Rusk, who had been governor of Minnesota and a member of the House. All things considered, Harrison had picked a pretty capable cabinet, but often Harrison would find himself doing the work of several cabinet members at once for many reasons. Harrison was forced to do much of the work of Secretary of State, as Blaine was often sick and spent extended periods recovering at his home in Maine. Blaine would, throughout the duration of his tenure, be the biggest problem for Harrison in the cabinet. Harrison also told his cabinet members that if they wanted to run for president, that they would have to resign from the cabinet first. A very reasonable request. Focusing again on the relationship between now President Harrison and Secretary Blaine, Blaine and his wife saw the Harrisons as their social lessers, and that they, the Blaines, and not the Harrisons, deserved to be in the White House as the President and First Lady. The Blaines would also be upset when Harrison refused to appoint their son to an important post in the State Department. On a cold, rainy day, Benjamin Harrison dressed warmly and wearing a hat, at the request of his wife, who was afraid of what might happen to Harrison. Remember, because of what happened to his grandfather? Well, Harrison was now being sworn in as the President of the United States, with the outgoing President, Grover Cleveland, holding an umbrella over his head as he read his speech. Harrison now had 4 years ahead of him in the White House. For the first few months of his administration, Harrison, as had all previous presidents since Andrew Jackson, spent most of his time dealing with office seekers, something that he absolutely hated. During his meeting with these office seekers, Harrison was often very blunt and reserved, coming off as rude and unenthusiastic. This is where his reputation of being a human iceberg comes from, and honestly, I don't blame him. Office seekers were the most annoying aspect of the presidency at this point. Harrison, when he got into office, had several big advantages going for him, the biggest being the fact that Republicans controlled the White House, the House, and the Senate for the first time in years, allowing them to get so much work done. In fact, this Congress, as we will see, would be one of the most productive ones of all time. Harrison got his pension bill, a tariff bill, several treaties with South American nations, bills like the Sherman Antitrust Act, a bill that would lay the foundation for the work of presidents like Teddy Roosevelt and William Howard Taft. During this Congress, Harrison also secured passage of a bill that would allow him to set aside forests for reserves and create several national parks as a result, helping to protect our environment. The most controversial bill of this Congress, though, would be the Sherman Silver Purchase Act that would require the United States to buy 4 million pounds of silver every month. It is very important to know that Harrison did support a mixed economy of things like greenbacks and silver along with gold, but only as a supplement to the economy, and the Sherman Silver Purchase Act was meant to appease Western congressmen who wanted to have the government purchase unlimited amounts of silver. While Congress was receptive to the interests of Harrison's legislative agenda, it is important to note that he did not get everything he wanted, one of them being an education bill that would have helped fund education in the country, but would ultimately fail due to Southern congressmen, as well as an election bill that would have protected the rights of African Americans to vote in the South. The bill was labeled as a forced bill in the South and was defeated. Another achievement of the Harrison administration was the pure number of states that he had made to the Union, and made the most of any president at 6. Those 6 are North and South Dakota, Montana, Washington, Idaho, and Wyoming. These states would add 12 Republican senators that would be important in the aftermath of the 1890 election. The 51st Congress was productive. One of the acts they passed, the McKinley Tariff Act, was very unpopular as panic struck. The Tariff Act had raised the price of many tariffs up in order to help grow American manufacturing. In the midterm elections of 1890, Republicans would lose 93 House seats and overall control the House of Representatives. They would maintain control of the Senate thanks to the Senate seats Harrison had recently added when he admitted those states, but the 1890 election ended up being a big blow to the Republicans as the Panic of 1890 set in. In terms of foreign policy, Harrison was vigorous in promoting U.S. interests. He hosted a conference with several Latin American countries in 1889 under the leadership of James G. Blaine, one of the only things that he had any real involvement in. He successfully dealt with diplomatic crises arising with Europe over bans on pork importation by improving the standards of U.S. pork. He dealt successfully with two crises involving Italy and Chile and found good resolutions with both of them. Again, despite the efforts of Harrison, he would see several failures, one involving Frederick Douglass, who had been asked by President Harrison to negotiate for a coaling base in Haiti. Douglass would fail due to the interference of an American admiral, and the biggest black mark on Harrison's foreign policy was the attempt of the U.S. to annex Hawaii. While Harrison did not order the coup of the Queen of Hawaii, he did nothing to restore her to power after she had been overthrown and tried to annex the kingdom, which was rejected by the U.S. Senate. Another black mark against Harrison was the massacre at Wounded Knee, when the U.S. troops opened fire killing 100. The fact that those responsible faced no repercussions and those 20 medals of honors were handed out in the aftermath was a shameful display by both the U.S. military and U.S. Congress, something that Harrison did nothing to remedy. As the presidential election of 1892 approached, Harrison and Blaine's relationship would continue to deteriorate, with Blaine, who had done very little work but took the credit for most of the administration's foreign policy successes, continually being propped up as a presidential candidate for the 1892 election. Blaine would resign from the cabinet 3 days before the Republican convention and would at the convention receive just enough votes to come in second place. Harrison, though, would be renominated on the first ballot with his vice presidential nominee, Whitelaw Reid, who was the U.S. Minister to France. Grover Cleveland would be easily renominated by the Democrats for a third time. The 1892 election would be very tame. President Harrison's wife was becoming sick, and Harrison would forego campaigning to take care of her. Eventually, it was realized the First Lady was suffering from tuberculosis. Former President Cleveland, out of respect, would also forego campaigning. Caroline Harrison would continue to decline throughout the campaign season, and on October 25th, 1892, Caroline Harrison succumbed to tuberculosis. 2 weeks later, President Benjamin Harrison would lose the 1892 election in a rematch to his 1888 opponent, Grover Cleveland, who would now become the 24th President of the United States. Harrison, in the aftermath of his wife's death, was distraught. His mood was not improved at all when in January 1893, former President Rutherford Hayes passed away, soon followed by Harrison's former Secretary of State, James G. Blaine. Harrison left office in March of that same year and would return to his home in Indianapolis. He spent his post-presidency working as a lawyer, defending Venezuela in an international court in Paris. He would lecture law at Stanford University, where the former president would encounter the future president Herbert Hoover at a baseball game. He would become the first president to have his voice recorded, and we still have that recording.
President of the United States, I was present at the first Pan-American Congress in Washington, D.C. Believe that with God's help, our two countries shall continue to live side by side in peace and prosperity. Benjamin Harrison.
Proud of was his Pan-American Conference that took place during his time in office. In 1896, Harrison, to the dismay of his children, would remarry Mame Dimmick, his wife's niece, and would have one child with her. In 1901, Harrison would become sick with pneumonia, and after 1 week would die. So now the question is, why have we forgotten Benjamin Harrison? And why should we make an active effort to remember him? Harrison, for all his faults, was incredibly important and laid that foundation for men like William McKinley and Teddy Roosevelt who came after him. He changed how the president interacted with foreign policy and oversaw a dramatically productive Congress. But Harrison did not lead during a time of war and was sandwiched between the novelty of the two Cleveland presidencies, so history has tended to ignore him. Thus is the life and legacy of our 23rd president. Guys, thanks for watching this video. This series has been really fun to make, and I'm hoping to do more like I said. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and enjoy the rest of your day. Harrison was most